kina semdol ka ke mo fa seda.
Welcome to Talking in Stations, a show about EVE Online, a spaceship game. If you're watching us live on Twitch TV, we also have a podcast version on talkinginstations.com or wherever you get your podcasts. We also have a YouTube hub with videos on demand at youtube.com/talkinginstations, all one word. Today we have Invasion episode number 58, and with the third and final installment of our retrospective on 2019. I'm your host, Carneros, and I'm joined by my co-host and two guests today. So let's take a moment and introduce them and let our podcast listeners hear your voices so they get a sense of who's talking. First, just for fun, even though you know him, I'm going to reintroduce our co-host, Mr. Elise Randolph, CEO of Habitual Euthanasia, a legend of Pandemic Legion, and a past member of the Council of Stellar Management. Elise.
Hey, how's it going? Happy holidays, everyone. This is really fun. I'm glad to be back on the show after the holidays are over. Santa's gone, left his stuff, and now I get to do spaceship stuff again.
Excellent. Me too. And then guest today, we have Darkshines, CEO of the Fuel Cartel in the Initiative, and also one of the lead FCs in this famed PvP alliance. Please say hello.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Yeah, FC in the Initiative, and happy to be here.
And then we also have Mr. Dunk Dinkle, current member of the Council of Stellar Management and a pillar of brave newbies in the Brave Collective. If you haven't seen his
Good morning.
YouTube
Good morning,
videos,
everyone. Just be sure you're wearing socks during this podcast.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today for another conversation about spaceships. Today, we're going to look at what happened in 2019, and we're going to pick up again. We covered it a little bit last episode. With the war in Tribute and Veil of the Silent. Just to recap for a second, the Imperium came north and engaged with NC Dot and the Pandemic Legion family in the regions of Tribute and Veil, with the idea of having a temporary large fight and then retracting back home because no one wanted to go and live in Tribute and Veil. But wait, there's more. So Darkshines, you were an FC in some of those battles, and you were on the side of the Imperium, which we didn't cover last time. We got the other guy's side. Do you have any memories of that war?
Yeah, I guess from our own perspective, I'll be honest, I didn't catch the last episode, so I'm not sure what the perspective was from the Imperium side. It was kind of the first, I guess, major offensive of 2019 from Imperium, going so far as to drop an offensive keep star into KQK on the border of Pureblind and Tribute. And it kind of screamed the Imperium's intent towards Tribute, I guess. We moved the super fleets up from Delve and from Fountain, and kind of the move fleets were pretty nice to see, big number. And from there it was kind of just a burn Tribute. To be fair to PamFam, the numbers that we brought were quite intense. I don't think there was a lot anybody could have done. And as you can see from the kill boards, there was a lot of structures died.
Even the Mittani was surprised at the number of Titans on that first main move up. In the back channel, he was saying, "Wow, this exceeded my high end of my estimate scale for how many might come." And he was shocked when there was like over 1,000 Titans. And it was crazy. Yeah, mind blowing. He was surprised.
Yeah, I remember on our side when we caught the move numbers, we were like, did you like link that or paste that thing twice? Did you just hit Control V twice? Did they double count? No, not at all. Just mass number of supers and titans.
Yeah, it was crazy, and just everything that goes into moving those, even though the route was relatively blue, because it, especially from Delve, it was all the way through Fountain, which is blue, and then into Cloud Ring, into the 6 RCQ Keep Star again, which is blue, and then up into Pure Blind. But yeah, even just the tie-dye Titans bumping on gates, just the amount of effort that goes into it, especially for FCs. I think people probably don't get enough props when they organize that kind of stuff, because it's quite intense, and that's
Yeah,
just for moving.
yeah. I think people don't realize it at all when the effort that comes to moving a super fleet, because that's when you're most vulnerable. You've got so many people with you, but someone's always going to be lagging behind. There's going to be one guy that his family's talking to him, or the phone rings. So he needs to mumble for a minute. He gets lost and tries to catch up, and that's definitely where like people are kind of looking for that straggler to drop on. So as an FC, you have to be like hyper vigilant to make sure everyone's where they're supposed to be, no one's getting lost. And I know from at least for PL, and I'm sure it's the same for Initiative and other people in the Imperium, it is like the least looked forward to part of a move up, or part of a deployment is the move up.
I think seeing the fleet gives everyone a bit of morale boost, regardless of whether it's Supers or Titans. But when you do a move up, when any alliance does a move up, it's all of it's everything they have in their main time zone, and it's always impressive for people to see each other like that. But when you actually warp to the first gate and see 5 Titans bounce off in different directions, then the headaches start.
And you guys had softened up that area as well, like Initiative by yourself with a few other SIGs from the Imperium. You guys had done quite a bit of work in the Declan area, right?
Well, Initiative had deployed up to Hakonen, which is the low sec system beside. It's on the border of both Vale of the Silent and Tribute, and we deployed up there in February. It was a very mixed deployment, but yeah, it kind of meant that we were already set up for when the main bulk of the Imperium moved in. I know a lot of the other SIGs in Goonswarm and other Imperium SIGs had also already been in the area in Pure Blind. So kind of, yeah, hitting between Declan and Tribute and Vale, there was almost a very small multi-front attacks across all 3 regions, I guess, on a very small scale, but attacks nonetheless.
And was that like part of the plan for the whole deployment? Was this like, we're going to go there in February, and then the rest of the Imperium, depending on how it's going to go, is going to come in later in the year? Or did it just kind of snowball organically? Like, hey guys, we're getting a lot of fun out here. There's lots of room for a bigger deployment. You want to come and give these guys a wallop?
I'd love to say that there was some genius master plan behind it, but I think when we deployed, or when Initiative deployed to Hakonen, it was just because we had been in Fountain since basically the previous war in and around X-47, and eventually you just reach a point where there is too much crabbing going on and too much drama internally, and you need to deploy to get rid of some of that frustration. So we deployed up to Hakonen because of that. And then it came as quite a surprise, I think, when Asher and Jay kind of approached us and said, "Hey, so we're going to drop a Keep Star here, and we're deploying our super fleet north." And we're like, "Okay, yeah, we can get in on that."
Nice. Yeah, I know from a lot of the PL side, at least, whenever we did something that seemed to be like we were like the tip of the spear, something for another force, it was always happened kind of by accident rather than a plan. So I'm glad that that works for other alliances as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I guess that's when people see movement in one direction, more people will tend to join in.
So then, were there any surprises in the war to you? Things that you didn't expect to have happen?
Surprises, I guess, looking back, not so much. Like I said, it was not realistic given the numbers Imperium brought north, for Pam to put up any solid form of defense. I guess kind of slightly disappointed that we didn't get any all-out Titan fights like we did in X-47 in the previous war. But I really, even from an Imperium FC point of view, you can't really fault them for that. It was the right thing to do. If there had been any major fights, I think the number of Titans that Imperium would have brought to the field would have just been too much. It wouldn't have made sense to take a fight. I guess the one thing that surprised me was when it was a few weeks in, I guess, and the PAMFAM started to move from their Keepstar and SH1, which was their staging point, back into towards Geminate. I didn't realize how far the hostiles would retreat. Again, it makes perfect sense, but it kind of just took me by surprise, and it kind of left the both regions, both Tribute, and Veil of the Silent, it kind of open for just everybody to attack, and I think it was pretty evident. I know some of myself and some of the other FCs were looking at different things we could line up to shoot, especially with our Titans, because we unfortunately didn't get to use them a huge amount. So we kind of looked at what structures we could hit, I think, the first week in, and there wasn't really anything we could shoot because the skirmish FCs from Goons had done this insane job of running fleets, I guess 24/7. I think there was 75 timers, structure timers on a timer board all at once, and it was hard to try and find something to shoot that wasn't already in ref. So that caught us off guard a bit. That was quite interesting.
There was a kind of competition going on behind the scenes between fleet commanders trying to run as many fleet ops in the war as they could, and just taking out fleet after fleet after fleet tirelessly. It was crazy.
Yeah, and that's like a time where you can get kind of younger fleet commanders, a little bit more experience, like moving around with caps, moving around with supers, organizing stuff. I know that's a lot of how Tess did it at one point when they were taking over parts of Delve way back when. It's just super easy to get people and say, hey, you take this area, I'll take this area, and you work on the organizational progress and all that stuff. So it's a really good learning tool for these FCs.
And I saw our operations channel occasionally pointing out operations coming up and saying, this is great for a new FC. Let's get a new guy in here to try this one out. We'll support you. We'll backseat you. We'll send a veteran with you to help you. So that was great. But I also saw some, very experienced, very talented FCs like Apple Pear taking out tons of fleets.
I think it's a good opportunity for people. Like, unfortunately, the way Eve seems to be at the moment is that you stay in your home region and you wait for somebody to come in to attack your oracles, and then you can drop everything you have on them. Whereas when you go to someone else's region, it really allows your FCs to run riot with whatever you have and just have fun. And it's all making progress regardless of what they do as well. So it's kind of all positives all around.
So then, how did the war end, Dark? Do you remember that part?
Oh, I think it was basically the Keepstars died. Am I misremembering some major thing? I can't.
Well, we suddenly got word back home that NPCs were attacking our structures. We're like, what? Do you remember that?
Oh, of course, yeah. The Drifter invasion.
The Drifter invasion, yeah. So we all had to run around
Well,
like
you're kind of minimizing like when that started, like when it started happening. All of the people who do alliance and coalition level logistics, like our phones and computers are just exploding with all the reports of everything getting hit, and we don't know what it is. Like we have no idea what's going on, and everyone's freaking out, and it was fucking chaos, and it was a completely bonkers time, unprecedented in EVE Online history. And so if you're a combat FC, you were probably like, oh, the logistics guys will handle that. But for the logistics people, this was fucking DEFCON 0.
If you're not a hardcore EVE player, you might not realize this, but each of the alliances that are holding sovereignty out in nullsec have all written little pieces or installed little pieces of software that will take an in-game alert that, oh, your structure was attacked. Or it's out of fuel, and will send a ping to you onto your computer and your phone and tell you, wake up, do something, and you call in a fleet commander to come, an FC, or you do something. So our phones were blowing up like crazy, and on all sides of the map.
Yeah, Pio, we were really happy. We were just like, oh, we lost all our structures already, so there's nothing for us to defend from these drifters. So we just took a break and had some fun going through wormholes and like poking things where the drifters were attacking and trying to see what movement we can get. But yeah, like I think one of our structures got hit because we had lost so many in Tribute and Tino and that entire area.
Well, the thing is that at the time nobody knew what was going on at all, and I still don't think we really know what went on. But basically, you're trying to figure out like how do you defend against these things. So people are in real time trying to invent strategies. What do you use? And then a bunch of they were very tough NPCs, so people were losing all kinds of expensive things to these NPCs while they're trying to figure out the strategy in real time. And it was extremely chaotic. And we had no idea how long it was going to go and what was the victory condition and all of these things. I think then what it led to was a lot of frustration, and that I think led to the creation of the quote null first Discord chat, which many have said has changed the game.
Yeah, I remember people trying things, and I think there was a rumor that Elo Knight tried a Titan on one of them and almost lost the darn thing. Had to go safe up, but people were trying stuff, and then it led to this whole wave of go around to every structure and check the fit and make sure it has plenty of bombs and make sure that there are enough people that have gunning rights. And those before those drifters invaded, each structure has a little gun turret, and one person can get in it and control the structure as if it were a ship and can shoot someone. And it won't do anything unless there's someone sitting in that gunning turret. Well, in those days, there would only be a small handful of people that could get in that turret because of roles and permissions and espionage and that stuff in EVE. They went through and changed that, and now there are hundreds of people in the Imperium space that have gunning rights and can go sit in those citadels and shoot if necessary. But there was a lot of work that was needed to be done by people crafting strategies, by people building and bringing around structure fittings and ammunition, by people trying to figure out how we're going to fix the access lists to allow permissions for and who to allow in. There was a lot going on. It was crazy.
I think actually, now that you say it, I think Init had moved its super fleet back ahead of Imperium at the end of that war to try and avoid all the tie-dye, and we had just landed back in IGE in Fountain when those attacks hit. And unfortunately, I wasn't as brave as Elo. I did not want to be the first person to lose a Titan to Drifter Rats. So I think we, took out Abaddons and all these different things to try and avoid them. And it was kind of interesting though, because it was unknown. It was absolutely frustrating, and a lot of people, it caused a lot of headaches. But it was also interesting because it was something that was unknown in Eve that you had to, put a bit of effort into thinking about. And I think in the end we just used Titans and Interceptors because, like someone in chat said, you couldn't probe them, so you had to you burn after them with Interceptors when they pinged, and then try warp Titans in on top of them to kill. At least that was the quickest way we found of doing it.
Yeah, Eve players seem to love and hate the unknown both at the same time. So they love the idea of like some unknown things happening, but they kind of like to have an inclination about what's going to happen, how long it's going to be there for, just some key details, right? So a lot of people that weren't in nullsec, I know their attitude was, "Oh, hey, this is really cool. Like, I love that CCP are doing this thing because they're adding elements of danger and unknown." And it's always funny when, like, especially your enemies have to get hamstrung by like NPCs or some new mechanic that you're not sure about. So like a lot of people in low sec and high sec, or people that didn't even own Sov, were like sitting there saying, "Oh, this is so good. This is so good." And I remember I was in some Discord channel, and Billy was just losing his mind at how this whole thing was playing out. He was so mad.
But his buddy Ron USMC was really enjoying it. He ended up enjoying fighting those guys. Although it would have been more fun if they had better loot drops.
Well, I think the thing is, in Eve, players like to find the pattern in things and find the, craft a strategy of how does this work. So you see it with incursions, you see it with Triglavian stuff. You see with a lot of things in which people want to figure out how do you do this, like the Satoyos, shipyards, all those things. They want to figure out how do you do that? How do you reach that victory condition? And the most frustrating thing about this Drifter event was that was indiscernible because it didn't exist. And so people kept trying to gather information, and if we get enough information, we'll know how to stop these and how do we get them out of our system and not coming back. And that was basically impossible. And I think that is what drove a lot of the people trying to defend against this crazy. It was a thing in the game. There was no way you could organize or prepare or do anything that you could kind of close this off, right? It was just a constant, every 15 minutes something else was getting attacked. I think that's what frustrated people, not so much that there was a challenge, that there was no solution to the puzzle at all.
Yeah, and that's very un-Eve-like as well. Like Eve Online, there's maybe they don't describe exactly what the perfect min-max situation is, but there usually is. And that's, as Dunk was saying, that's something that the players would like to do. It reminds me a lot of, if you guys have played the game Factorio, there's a lot of ways you can make your little factory, but the people that min-max to the extreme and make it super organized and go to the end game on that, they seem to also have a really good time in EVE Online. Like there's a really good Venn diagram overlap for that.
But Dunk Dinkle briefly mentioned the Null First channel, which I want to touch on just a little bit more. So imagine a chat channel in Discord with such famous names in it as Headliner from Pandemic Legion, Vince Draken from Northern Coalition Dot, Villy from Test, and Sword Dragon from Dead Coalition, Elo Knight, Gobbins from the Horde, all just Aerith, some really, big names in this channel together, all we'll say kibitzing with each other on how to deal with the latest crazy thing from CCP.
Well, I think besides just it being kind of infamous people in Eve, the key thing was in the past, you kind of talked to your friends and grudgingly talked to your enemies. and you didn't really have a lot of personal relationships with the person you had painted as the villain in whatever war you were running there. So this was the first time that people were all together that kind of ran the overall donut meta all in the same place and got to know each other in some way, and for once had a common enemy of these drifters. And so it broke down a lot of the kind of social barriers in which people would say, well, this person's an asshole, I don't deal with them. And then they were chatting with them about a common problem, and they said, hey, that person's not such an asshole anymore. And, I think that was a very different thing that has been talked about, is that now there is a place based on this drifter event where the, quote, leaders of nullsec can get together and discuss things in a way that didn't really occur for the past 15 years or whatever it is. Maybe at least there was another time, but I don't remember anything close to this kind of null first. There might have been Jabalon or whatever it was, but this felt very different and changed some of the personal dynamics, of the game.
Yeah, you hinted at the thing after like the first Delve War. There was a channel called Jabalon 5, which was like it was run by Goonswarm at the time, and they had all the FCs from all the people they had worked with, and even some that they had worked against. That kind of stuck together for a while, and then Sword had a Discord channel, which was the Blue Donut, which had a few like similar type of high level names. But this was another example of players even coming together with their enemies and saying, hey, how do we solve this? And you listed a lot of people that are also on the CSM. So there's this, there's this fake notion, there's this fallacy that people on the CSM know what's going to come in EVE Online, and they have kind of like alliances and blocks put people on the CSM to get an advantage. But that's absolutely not the case, obviously. A, that makes no sense. And B, like in this case, these CSM members, like you were on the CSM, you had no idea this was coming. You had no way to prepare for it, and you were just like everyone else.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy that first month of the CSM 14 because we got elected in Toronto in I think June or whatever, and we didn't really get read in and part of the NDAs and all that stuff until like the end of June or early July, and that's right when the drifters and Blackout and everything was kicking off. And so there's 5 of us brand new to the CSM saying, is this how it always is? Is this just how it's going to be? And then the older CSM are just losing their goddamn minds all the time, every minute. And yes, and if you've ever met Aerith or talked to Aerith in person, he's a person who goes from 0 to like 5 million miles an hour over things. So it was very interesting to try and kind of get the lay of the land from some of these frustrated veteran CSM members at the time. It was a really bonkers time.
So with the arrival of the Drifter invaders, the Imperium pulled forces back to Delve and Fountain, and then we saw, NC Dot and PanFam had all already moved across the map, regions away, and so Veil of the Silent and Tribute were kind of left as a vacuum. There was no one in charge of the area. There was no one. There were no. The Keepstar that we used to invade was still there, but in general, it was a desert. And then something happened. Some smaller groups came in and took some space. Took a little space. They didn't try to take the whole regions. They just took a little chunk, each for themselves. And we see folks moving into Tribute like Trigger Happy, Rote Capel, Hazardous Company, Unspoken Alliance, and folks moving next door into Veil like the Reverberation Project, You're Dunked, Divinity, and the charmingly named Scumlords. So they made themselves a sort of, balkanized territory of small independent states who sometimes worked with each other and sometimes didn't, and provided a lot of active PvP at a smaller scale with less reliance on supercapitals. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, I'd say so. We had a great show with them, with a few people from they called themselves the Tribute Fight Club when they moved to Tribute. Even though they moved into, as Cornelius was saying, they moved into other areas in the north as well. But they referred to themselves collectively as the Tribute Fight Club. And we actually had a few of them on, like, what do they like? What do they dislike? What do they do? And kind of the MO was, hey, we fight each other. We know we're not like trying to take space from one another because we want the good times to keep rolling. So we're just going to do small fights. And then whenever like a bigger fish comes in, we kind of have this unspoken agreement where we'll work together to kind of shove them out. And so every one of the big players was kind of looking at this, saying, "Hey, this is a fun little thing that's happening in this vacuum." Because Tribute's fantastic space, right? So it doesn't have like great true sec or anything, but it's got little pockets that do. It's got some good moons to harvest. It's great and close to JITA, so it's easy for logistics. So you can make money in there and hop it out to JITA and import stuff that you can't make locally. So it's really easy for a small to middle alliance to succeed in that area. And what we saw them, they were just like constantly fighting one another, having a lot of fun, getting, maybe like siphoning off disillusioned members from like larger blocks who are tired of like the big fleet, organized fleet combat. They want a little bit more roaming content, a little bit more small gang stuff. We saw them slowly starting to flock to these groups.
And then one of the next things that happened was that the Vexor Navy issue, a very well adopted ship, cruiser class, sort of in the middle of the training schedule, not too hard to get into for a newer character or an alt. The Vexor Navy issue got its roles completely redone. Most people sort of saw it as a nerf, or it was sort of presented initially before it was done as a nerf incoming. But it was actually sort of a complete redesign of the ship to a different purpose, from PvE to sort of small gang PvP is my interpretation of it.
Yeah, pretty much.
It went from mostly just a drone platform to sort of a drone turret platform.
So if you're unfamiliar with that... Oh,
okay. Go ahead, Dunk.
No, I mean, look, this isn't some subtle like balancing act. This is the VNI, the Vexor Navy issue, was a primary AFK ratting ship. Players would get into this VNI. They'd, I don't know, orbit at 50K with your afterburner on or whatever you do, and you let your drones run, and you're basically making ISK while you're watching Netflix on the screen. You might have 3 or 4 accounts doing this VNI ratting at the time, right? Players would do that who were at their computer, but also a lot of people who ran bots would use the VNI because it was so simple to script and execute and run. So you had both what's called low attention players, just kind of AFK ratting, and you would have bots doing ratting because the VNI was such a powerful platform for not paying attention to EVE. And so I think that the game needed people to pay attention. If you're going to be making money in EVE, you should be in some ways paying attention. And so I think the change from the VNI was meant to disincentivize you from AFK ratting and make it into a combat ship where you go blow other ships up. So that was the goal, I think. And then the design followed, which was, let's make it so that this ship still has value and is used in fleets, unlike the Nighthawk, but is not able to be used as this AFK ratting boat. Now, there's alternatives to the VNI, but definitely that was the design goal.
Yeah, and so essentially, just like Dunk was saying, like the idea behind this was you just orbit with an oversized afterburner. You orbit, drop your drones orbit, and then the NPCs can't attack you because you're too small a target moving too fast, and your drones end up wiping them out. So you can use this to make some ISK if you're an alpha character, or if you're an omega and you just have a few alphas that you want to run. You can also use it to prop up your ADMs without paying much attention or risking all that much. You're talking, the hull is cheap. The whole setup is super cheap to run. So alliances were using this to prop up ADMs in areas that they didn't necessarily live, but they wanted as a buffer. So, it was kind of a crummy thing. They announced it at, I believe, Eve North in Toronto, and I got to speak to CCB Fozzie about it, and he was like, "Yeah, we know that this has been a problem for a long time. Like, there's various aspects to it, and we don't like any of the aspects, right? So, bots use it for nefarious reasons because it's easy to code, like Dunk was saying, and players do it to do AFK ratting. So they decided to completely change it. I asked him if it was a nerf. He was like, "No, it actually is going to be a fun ship to fly." Like I can envision Fozzie is super passionate about the game, right? So he immediately went into some fits that he would use the VNI for, and different like small gang fights he'd use it for. But yeah, so it got replaced by kind of bigger ships, more expensive ships, and slower ships, which are easier to catch, and you can punish them a little bit more.
Yeah, the people in chat are bringing up there's other ships people are still kind of being AFK in, and absolutely. But I think by far the most dominant thing was this VNI AFK ratting, and I think they tried to take a swipe at that. And they're going to continue to try and make that if you're playing Eve, you should be there playing Eve and not be so AFK about it. So players are always going to min-max and find whether it's the Myrmidon or the Dominix or whatever it is to do this kind of thing. They're going to keep trying. But I think that was the whole point of the VNI, was to kind of make a little more public a statement of not only are we going to try and ban botters because of we caught them botting, but also we're going to change it and make it not so profitable to be AFK.
And
they had another design goal too of the economy and trying to make it stronger and healthier. It had gotten kind of we'll just say flabby, but they wanted to tighten up on the economy, and just this one change to the VNI to one ship had reverberations in the economy that did a lot for the health of it. Although it's hard to separate it just out by itself, because the botting aspect of it getting attacked and cleaned up also had a massive effect at the same time on the economy.
Yeah, this is kind of the era where CCP is getting a little bit more, I guess, hands-on in how they want to deal with what they view to be an economy that's just a little bit out of whack. So you see, like, this is like one of the first steps. And it also appears to be, and obviously we have very little insight, and this is a lot of speculation, but it seems to be the start of a new priority at CCP to like really start turning the screws to botters and people that are having a nefarious role in the game and are kind of trying to break the game and use it for the purposes that it wasn't meant for. Obviously, the war on botting is a constant war that CCP never gives up on, but it does feel like this is the time where there's a little bit more attention that's been paid to it.
Yeah, I think spotting's part of it, but also, as we heard through the summer at different events, CCP's focus, and Hilmar specifically, his focus has been on, as he views it, the core infrastructure of the game, meaning the economy, how people play, the challenges, and all that kind of stuff. And so when you talk about the economy change, the VNI ratting is just a small part of it. I mean, I've had the opportunity to talk with Hilmar several times about this stuff, and he's not so much like, how do we rebalance the Nighthawk or something like that? He's like, how do we get the economy, how do we make the core parts of the game work? And so you see things like the 64-bit client coming out this year, and you see other like fundamental changes to the way the game plays coming out. And then the focus on the economy and like, is it in balance, or are people rewarded the right ways, and all that kind of stuff. And so I think they took with the chaos stuff was a lot of big swings, like what we Americans would call, attempting to hit the grand slam in the ninth inning. That didn't always go the way they wanted, but they were attempts to kind of like, can we shake some of these foundational things to realign the core economy of the game? The VNI was just part of it, but there's a much bigger focus now on trying to make it more in line with their vision of a harsher world than it had been in the last few years.
And boy, did they succeed in some things that they were trying to do. Maybe a little bit too successful in kind of evening out the economy and making sure the faucets aren't as turned on as they might have. because this segues quite nicely into another change that seems to be introduced around this area just after. That is the Blackout, the nullsec Blackout, which you probably heard about in some capacity or experienced. It's where CSB just took local in nullsec, and they're just like, yeah, we're turning it off. We're going to turn it into delayed mode, which is similar to what it's like in wormhole space. So you're not showing up in local unless you speak.
Which was shocking. They gave us a little warning. They gave us like a week of warning, something like that.
It's great to see CCP make those changes and to be active in them, regardless of whether they're good or bad. At least they're trying some. But yeah, that was a bit intense as well.
What was the reaction from your people, Dark?
We had Pandarelica on one side, who was doing like a rain dance of, and then we had everyone else on the other side, kind of a bit skeptical about how it would affect things for them on an individual level. If you were roaming or if you were kind of aggressively hunting people, then it was fantastic because it made your job so much easier. It's very hard for Rorquals to go safe if they don't know anyone is in local with them. But I think equally it made things, on the flip side, it made things a lot harder for people to do anything in nullsec apart from PvP. So if you have accounts that you have to plex, a lot of people do. If you've ships you need to buy, doctrine ships, you have to make ISK for that. And I think during Blackout, it was basically impossible to have a reliable income. There was a higher chance of you losing your ship and losing money from that than actually making any ISK for it.
Yeah.
I think there were a lot of unintended side effects to it. I mean, I think the idea is very interesting, but what you saw in the numbers and the way the players reacted to it, especially newer players without a lot of experiences, they just found themselves especially frozen out of a lot of the simpler money-making activities they were used to. The simple ratting, the exploration, people really had a tough time with this. And a lot of the groups that were kind of the, quote, collateral damage, not just, Rorqual mining and stuff that was kind of, hated on the Reddit and the people's focus of like too many Rorquals. There was a lot of people weren't able to play Eve, even in the simplest ways that aren't really a problem. And I think that's what was not as well, it surprised me, I'll just leave it at that, about how much it affected the smaller player, the player without a lot of investment in the game. And I think we saw the drop off in participation because of that.
I think when it first hit, the feedback immediately from a lot of people was that Eve is now impossible. I'm not doing anything anymore in nullsec. At least from I think a majority of line members in nullsec alliances, or at least our own alliance. And I was semi-inactive at the time, but I came back and kind of said like, you're all wrong. If you just organize a little bit and do stuff in groups, you'll be fine. And then I remember running 1 or 2 fleets and those fleets going sideways because 5 bombers decloak on your Rorquals, and then suddenly you're losing excavators left, right, and center. To the extent that a week later, I was kind of like, screw this, and I brought my corp at the time into Iridia and took all of LSH's R64s because it was easier to make money that way than it was to live in nullsec, basically. So running missions in lowsec and mining R64s was the best way that I found to make ISK, and I consider myself quite a capable player. But when you've got things like bombing groups just running around hitting your excavators and stuff, it's you can counter it to an extent, but not all the time. And when you mess up, it's very costly.
Yeah, the counterplay is disproportionate to what you get out of it. But yeah, as Dunk was saying, like obviously Dunk from Brave Newbies, he gets a lot of insight from some newer players as well as older players. Brave Newbies is an old alliance now, but a lot of the people that were doing exploration, of all things, you would think exploration would be safe, but oh no, everyone and their mom was out in a cloaky Loki or something, just waiting for you to go to a thing and just blap, you're dead. No no way to get around it.
And then I'd like to point out that in addition to the game changes and the player behavior changes, there was another level going on, which was the messaging from CCP at this time. And one of the messages coming through is, we're mostly focused on the new player experience right now. We're working really hard on bringing new players in. Lots of players are coming to the game every week. And we'd like to make them welcome, onboarded well, ensconced in the game and playing with you guys. If with the semi-unspoken message that if you old people don't like the changes coming to the game, that's fine. We've got the new people coming in to take your place. That was how some of the really well-established PvE players in nullsec were interpreting CCP's messages. So here's a riskier environment with no additional reward to compensate for that risk. A lot of people interpreted that as, this is not a great time for me to undock at all. And they didn't.
Yeah, they certainly did not. But like we were saying, it was and like Darkshan was saying, it was a really interesting idea, and it's kind of great to see CCP do big ideas like that. But the knockoff effect was a little bit too grim. And as Cornelius was saying, the messaging, just the way it was framed, like people read into it. It wasn't even necessarily the messaging entirely, but the way people read into it. And they didn't hear anything to the contrary. They were like, "Oh well, we're not wanted here. Let's go play WoW or play some other game."
I think it's
that was unfortunate timing. Go ahead.
It's a very dangerous message to interpret as well, because, again, I don't know how many people realize this, but Rorqual, a lot of people complain about Rorquals, and obviously Blackout had a serious effect on Rorquals, as well as everything else. But Rorquals mainly because it's probably probably the biggest way people make ISK in the game. And love it or hate it, Rorquals are fight generators, and CCP removed basically every other fight generator that there is in the game. For example, passive income R64s were hugely fought over. Like you would throw billions and billions and billions in dreads and anything to take fights to win these R64s. People don't do that anymore over the new structures. It's all about Rorquals. So you can complain about them all you want if you don't like them, but it's what everybody looks for when they're trying to get a fight. If you tackle a Rorqual, you're 90% guaranteed you're going to get a response. And with Blackout, Rorquals docked up. They didn't do anything. So now you have hugely depleted chances for big fights in Eve, because the Rorquals aren't there. Sure, you can fight a 20-man roaming gang, and that's awesome, but that's only for 20 people. You can't run an alliance PvP activity off 20-man roaming. So without the Rorquals and without people like Titans, Supers, all these things that should be out ratting and making Iskins, they weren't there, and the chance of catching them obviously disappeared with that, which was not good for anybody.
Yeah, it's a very interesting way to put it. Like, if Rorquals are left unchecked, which kind of happened in Delve for about a year, they are just ISK printing machines, right? But when you look at them in the sense that they are content generators, like active content generators, then they're, like you were saying, they can be a force for good if there are the hunters out there to kind of catch them.
Absolutely, it's a balancing act, and I think even just if you look at Blackout, it went from being completely safe, mostly, with having Intel True Local. Then it just completely swung to the other side, where it's absolutely not safe to do anything because you can't see anything. So if they could find the balance in between there, same with the Rorquals and same with everything else, if it could just be balanced out a bit better, then Eve would be in a much better place.
But instead of going to a third setting, they actually just turned off the nullsec blackout and went back to the previous nullsec local system. And then they made another big change, which was the sinosuro fields became completely changed, and that had a huge impact too. They went from pretty much almost any ship can fit a sino to only basically force recons and black ops battleships, and no one really uses the black ops battleships for that, or very little. So it's basically came down to the Falcon, Razu, Pilgrim, and Rapier as their 4 ships for sinos. That was crazy.
Yeah, that was a huge change, right? Because before, if you caught somebody ratting in a belt, they just light a sino in the umbrella fleet, which is like the standing supers that are just chilling, waiting for bad guys. They just come in, save the day, woof, you're done. But now, you need to have, you can't just fit a sino to your ship. You have to either have an alt on standby, or they have to jump to a beacon, which can then be dragged off. So it adds a lot more granularity. But, there's always 2 sides to it, right? So industrial ships used sino ships used jump freighters and sinos extensively to get things done. So it didn't only affect the PvPers, it affected the logistics guys. Dunk, what was your take on the sino change? Like, how did you guys adapt to it?
Dunk's a famous logistics guy, among other things. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I think sino changes are good. I think the first iteration of design was a bit too dramatic, and it started to make it very tough for the basic infrastructure of Eve to work, to move jump freighters around if every time you were undocking 300 to 400 mil sino ships. So they tried to address that in the design, but again, they're trying to spur conflict in Eve. They're trying to spur wrecks and explosions and all that kind of stuff. And I think they've achieved some of that. The concern that people who do a lot of logistics is it created what we would call weaponized inconvenience. So the people who weren't the problem, which was jump freighter people moving their stuff around, they're getting impacted by this change that hopefully is going to create more conflict and stuff like that. So the industrial sino is a good middle ground with it. It's not perfect, but I think it did a lot of the frustration for people who do kind of infrastructure level logistics was now you needed to train all of these sino alts a dramatic amount of skill points up to be able to fly the force recons when needed to light capital sinos as opposed to industrial sinos. So those of us that kind of support our groups in those ways were suddenly faced with this challenge of, do I skill inject to it? Do I train it up and have limited resources? How do I move these things around? So a little bit of reinvention, which isn't bad, but it can feel for a lot of people that do that kind of work that there's no benefit, that it's simply another weight they have to carry with no benefit to them, which is never a fun thing for people playing a video game.
Were fleet commanders affected by the sino changes with their ability to use capital ships in fleet ops? Dark.
I think, everybody who has any interactions with sinos were affected. I think it added an extra layer of something else that you had to plan for FCs, whereas before I know if you're FCing supers previous to the changes, for example, every Apostle, every Supercarrier, every Titan, they all had a sino fit. So if anything went wrong, if one guy got left behind, all you had to do was light a sino, and you could jump back to him, or you could get support onto him. That doesn't happen anymore. If you need to sino in somewhere, you could warp in a T3 that's heavily tanked, and light sino on grid, jump in, and all your subcaps land before the sino dies. FC is happy, fleet's on grid, and that doesn't happen anymore. There's just an extra level of preparation has to go in for FCs, and you have to have. It's not okay to just have one sino. you have to have multiple sinos, which means that people now have to bring multiple alts, whereas before they didn't. They may have had an alt scouting, or maybe an alt that they had in a triage or a titan, or something else. Whereas now people, like, you have to bring a lot of sino alts to fleets to make sure that you aren't at a disadvantage, because if you run out of sino alts and you want to escalate to caps or bring in reinforcements, then if you lose all your sino ships, and bad things will happen, kind of like what happened with the Imperium dread bomb on
the Locust fleet.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, the downfall there was they didn't have sinos ready the way they should have. So yeah, I mean, it had a major impact.
Another thing is just getting into the system for the fight, right? So if you wanted to bring capitals to a fight, you get one kind of tanked ship, bring it in. You could just worry about getting one carrier in, right? So the FC could just bring kind of a durable ship, light the sino, jump his ship in because he knows exactly when it's going to go up, and he can load perfectly fine, and then light the sino on that carrier for the rest of the armada to come in. Now it's to do it safe, you have to sino in off grid, right? Which then gives your enemy a time to warp to you, a time to put up interdiction bubbles to drag you off. So there's a lot of new nuance that comes with capital fights, and it kind of gives the advantage to the defender a little bit, or the person who gets on grid first, which kind of goes back to the old days of EVE Online, where it was, oh, this timer is in 4 hours, better form now and get into the system to make sure no one can get in.
I mean, it's quite frustrating because the way that sinos for capital ships work and the way that sinos for a Titan bridge work for subcaps, for example, are not the same. So when you light a sino, at the moment, if you light a sino now with a rapier, for example, on grid, and you want to drop dreads, as long as your dreads hit the jump to X button, they will land where the sino was. So it's kind of okay. It's not ideal, but it's kind of okay. However, if you warp, for example, a rapier into a subcap fight, which at the moment, to make things even worse, is usually eagles or munins, things that have huge range and can insta-blap your recon. When you light a sino and you bridge somebody, if the sino dies before they load grid, they will load somewhere else in system, which is terrible for the couple of people who load before the sino dies. So you'll get 20 people get murdered by the hostile fleets, and then the other 100 people wait to get a warp in so you can get on grid. It's just completely messy. So I don't know, like before you could warp in like a devoter or something and it would survive usually long enough to get your subcap fleet on grid, but not anymore. So you have to change tactics when doing that now as well, which makes things even more complicated.
Well, I think that change was needed, and so I'm not kind of thinking that this is some terrible thing that we have to adjust our tactics and all this kind of stuff. I think as they would say, the proof is going to be in the pudding, is that after we've let this thing run for several months, to be able to start doing some analytics, both on the CCP side, and I'm sure if there's some players that are going to kind of try and generate, like, are we having more or less capital fights? Like, is this causing more destruction in EVE, which is the goal, or is it causing less destruction? Are there less fights because of these changes? And I think it takes time for the meta to generate about how do you use the new sinos as opposed to the old sinos. But I think that will really kind of tell the story is, was this change having the intended effect of more carnage, which I think most of us would like to see more carnage in EVE. But I think it's too early to tell exactly whether that's happening unless someone's already done the math.
I feel like removing sinos from capital ships across the board, like Titans, Rorquals, everything like that, was a great change. I think removing them from every subcap except Black Ops and Recons is a mistake that they should probably look at adding them back again to something like, especially Hicks. Whereas, everyone loves when Titans die, right? So if you tackle somebody, with a hick, you should be able to light a sino on them to bring people in to kill whatever you've tackled. But limiting the sinos down so that you're not going to get blobbed unless you see certain ships on grid is good, but it's too limited at the moment. If they could find some balance in between fitting silos on more subcaps but not fitting them on capitals, I think that's probably a sweet spot. I think as it is at the moment, in my own opinion, again, it's too harsh. It's a bit like Blackout. They need to tweak it a little bit.
Well,
just to define for new players, though, Hick, when he says that, is heavy interdiction cruiser, and it's a much more durable ship than the Force Recons that have the Sinos now. Go ahead, Elise.
I was going to say the good thing is that we do now have a team called Team Talos that is kind of working on iteration and kind of making quick changes to the game, quick balance changes to the game where it's kind of deemed necessary. That was introduced at Eve Vegas, I believe. Yeah. The first update was Howling Interceptors, where they're just tweaking combat interceptors and made them worth flying again. And, they've made a slew of other changes. I'm sure you've kind of gotten to bathe in the tears of your patriot there, Pando, as he got the Boosh fleet kind of nerfed really, really hard. You guys had made that fleet just look way too dominant. And then when everyone tried to copy it, they failed horribly. But the entire Boosh meta has been nerfed as a result of like one of the Team Talos changes.
I think the Boosh changes were interesting because they were strong in certain situations, but I guess it's really how do you say this? If you were on the receiving end of a Stuka fleet or a Boosh fleet, you were in for a bad time. But if you were the ones flying it, then it was great because it was finally a doctrine that could get in under a super umbrella and do some damage, not just run away at the first sign of a Sino. And unfortunately, Eve doesn't have any of those doctrines at the moment. Like if you come into Fountain, if you go into Delve, if you go into Geminate, as soon as you tackle a Rorqual, and if you're in anything bigger than a slippery frigate, you're in for a bad time because they will get stuff on grid, they will trap you in system, and then you're going to stay logged off there for hours. Whereas because of the Boosh fleet, you had the option to engage and disengage. And it wasn't all that strong against subcaps. If somebody like Fraternity, for example, and actually, what's that new alliance, Army of Mangoes? They knew how to fly against Stukas. So once you knew how to fly against the Boosh fleet, you could deal with it. Whenever Fraternity Rorquals were tackled, or whenever Mango Rorquals got tackled, they would bridge in Munins and they would orbit their anchor at 30, 40 kilometers. So even if you bombed their anchor, only a few ships would die. Meanwhile, they only had to kill 5, 10 of your ships, the Booshing ships, Storks and Bifrosts, and that was your fleet completely neutered. So yeah. Sometimes it was super powerful. A lot of the times it wasn't all that powerful, but it did allow groups to get in under super cap umbrellas, which I think is, even speaking from a super cap umbrella point of view, it's something that Eve needs a lot more of to make it interesting.
I will say that some of the best listening this year has been Pando talking about the Boosh nerf and explaining to everyone how easy it was to counter Stuka fleets, as long as you had the exact perfect hard counter and you had Titans ready to go and you had Sinos ready to go and everything lined up. As long as you had all of that ready to go in every location in Eve, Stukas aren't a problem at all. And so that was quite enjoyable for me to hear how easy it was to counter Stukas flown by Init. It was delicious.
Well, there's countering Stukas, and then there's countering Init Stukas, right? So it's like two different scenarios.
I think to be fair, it's very specifically Pando, who I see in chat at the moment. He was just insane when he flew those things. Like I used to fly them when he would need it, but it was nowhere near on the same level. It was his baby. He grew it. He worked with it, and I mean, I understand what you're saying, Dunk, about like having you did have to meet a certain amount of criteria to counter a Stuka fleet. you didn't have to have Titans. You know, if you bridged in a Munin fleet, all you had to do to counter a Stuka fleet was kill the Magus, or not the Magus, sorry, the Storks and Bifrost, and that's exceptionally easy to do.
That's it. Because the Stuka Goku fleet FC definitely won't try and protect those ships and keep them out of harm's way by jumping 100 kilometers every time they want. So I think it's a good content generator. I hope we kind of adjust the Boosh thing a little bit, but I just saying that the deliciousness of hearing the Stuka Goku fleet FCs talk about it and the amount of tears that came out of them was, for once, just startlingly good to have it be on the aggressor side as opposed to the Rorqual pilot defensor side.
If you were never on the receiving end of these fleets, Shark, why don't you just give us a quick explain like I'm 5 of what a Stuka fleet is?
A Stuka fleet was you have these ships in Eve called command destroyers, and a command destroyer can fit a micro jump field. This is pre-change, so they can fit a micro jump field, which will allow you to take every ship around you within I think it's a 6-kilometer radius, 100 kilometers in whichever direction your ship is pointing at the time. And basically, the idea was that the idea was that you would have 10 or 12 of these ships. They would anchor up, so they would the fleet would all stay within a 6-kilometer ball of each other on their anchor, and it would allow you to be extremely mobile on the battlefield. You know, getting from one point to another within 100 kilometers of each other. It allowed a lot of it's a much more fluid kind of I guess fighting style, if you want to use that term. It's much more fluid because it's much more fluid than warping around different spots on grid. Because when you warp around a grid, it interrupts things like anchoring. You lose lock, all these different things. When you boosh around, none of that happened. It was it just ran a lot smoother. And it basically you could move around 100 kilometers in any direction multiple times, and you could bomb people because part of the main damage were stealth bombers tanked afterburning stealth bombs. So you had torpedoes, but you also had bombs, and then you also had a kind of defensive style ship in we used Retribution, and also Kikimoras, which were turret-based ships that would shoot out to about 40 kilometers and allow you to defend things like fighters or subcap tackle and stuff coming in. So it was a very versatile fleet. Obviously, its major weakness was the command destroyers. As soon as you lost your command destroyers, that was it, game over. You had to leave because you couldn't do anything else. That's basically a Stuka fleet. Actually, fun fact: I don't know if you were at all part of the PL Dread Bomb and Fountain on my Moloch, at least.
I was not.
Okay. Well, PL Headliner, I think, was the person, or at least he's the name I recognized when PL Dread bombed my Moloch last year. They also brought in a Naga fleet, which I don't think many people realized. But Pando, these Stuka fleets weren't around at the time. Pando had some afterburning bombers with, it was like the first iteration, I guess, of the Stuka fleet. The Nagas landed on grid and instantly died.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, that sounds about how that would happen.
So that was the very first. I think Pando, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what he likes to refer to as the very first.
It's a good combination of a low signature, a high damage, high burst damage, and insanely high maneuverability. So you can just move yourself around the battlefield, and
very, very reasonable cost compared to the targets you can hit with them.
McLeod was showing a video of an initiative taking down some pretty big ships with some Stugas. So they can pack a walloping, especially under the right FC. I'd say has probably at the time it had the highest skill cap of any fleet doctrine in the game. So it was one of those fun things. But it got nerfed down a little bit. We'll see if, well, more than a little bit. The MJD Team Talos themed was too strong, so they lowered it to what, 25 people. It'll just take 25 people randomly from your fleet with you.
25 people, yeah, exactly.
So instead of infinite people that are within the range, which is like 5 kilometers, it just takes 25. So if you have more than that, the other guys get left behind and they die and cry. So still for like small gangs or Pico gangs, it'll. But yeah, so that's kind of one of the interesting things. We get to see Team Talos who makes changes like that. And then, towards the end of the year, as we have to wrap up, we see kind of the end of the ongoing fighting between Fraternity and Legacy. Those two groups, which had been fighting seemingly forever. Like it just seemed like these guys were always
at the complete exclusion of all Eve media to in the whole year of everything is stagnant. Here are two major coalitions fighting every single day in subcaps, capitals. Komodos are dying, Titans are dying, Dread Bombs are dying. This stuff is happening for 6 goddamn months, and everyone's like, "Oh, nothing's happening in Eve. Well, what happened up in Tribute was some like whatever." There's a goddamn 6-month blood fest going on, the payback for the Meteor Coalition last year trying to kill Legacy. And it's happening the whole time, and everyone's like, yeah, nothing's happening in Eve. I don't know what the hell is going on. And meanwhile, two coalitions are slamming against each other in every time zone, every day for 6 months. And in the notes for Talking in Stations, it's literally one bullet point out of this whole 2-page document. That's how much Eve Media cares about the Southern War, right? Now, they're going to try to put stuff on screen to convince you that this is not an issue. But I tell you, it is an issue that these were a major slugfest that didn't even get a goddamn name because everyone was ignoring it because someone up in Venal had an Astrohus. Like, come on. It was a huge fight. There was a lot of good fights on each side. Trillions of ISK got blown up. FCs were made. It was all over the place. New tactics were tried. It was an awesome war that went on and on and on and showed that you can still fight a war even under all these conditions. And
so, this war
that's my rant.
This war endured through Blackout, through the VNI changes, through the Sino changes, through the Sino Jammer changes. Like, all of this happened during the war that was going on all the time. As Dunk was saying, luckily we at Talking in Stations had Ron, who anytime we said, "Oh, there's not really too much going on," he'd just chime in and give an impassioned Dunk style motivational speech to let us know, "Oh no, Test and Legacy Coalition and Winterco are still going at it time and time again." And this was pretty much. As Dunk was saying, if you just played Eve on Reddit or you just stay in your little bubble, you didn't pay any attention to this because it didn't have flashy, cool names. Which, Dunk, I blame you. You have to come up with a name for a war. Everyone knows this. It's your responsibility as the aggressor to come up with a hip and cool war, hip and cool name for the war. So that part's on you. But yeah, this thing had been going on just forever, and it finally ended. When Winter Coalition were just like, "Oh, we can't do this. Like, the legacy is just too much."
No, it wasn't that simple, right? It was the war basically ended as we were starting to chew through the Sino Jammer wall, and there was lots of good fights over that. There was wins, losses, all that kind of stuff, and it came down to literally a main staging Keepstar got reinforced on a lucky day, and it created an opportunity for a major super capital fight over to kill this Keepstar that was the main staging system for Winter Coalition. And so Winter Coalition rallied everything they had for this. This was their line in the sand. This was going to be their ULAX. And they did. They showed up with 200 Titans on grid, with more reserves ready to go to throw into this fight. And Legacy basically stood down from taking that fight, but saw an opportunity to use that while Winterco is pinned down to defend their Keepstar and reinforced, I think, 15 critical eye hubs in Deadroid and set up all these timers, which became an indefensible situation to defend 59 hubs down the road. And it was after that point that the Winterco leadership said, we really can't defend against this anymore. It's better to get a strategic retreat rather than to try and lose battle after battle against the situation. So it was an event that caused the end of this war. It didn't just peter out. And for Winterco to be seen as they got outnumbered, if you think having 200 Titans alone on field is being outnumbered, that's just ridiculous. Like, this was a strategic play that happened, and a strategic decision to back out and not lose all 200 Titans. So again, Matterall is just pinging me relentlessly on Discord that he did cover this. He didn't cover this to the degree it should have been covered. This was a major war in Eve. It deserves a good goddamn name. I am tired of talking about BTAC-R. I'm tired of talking about things that happened 5 years ago. This year, shit went down, and it didn't get reported. We didn't even get a fucking name for our war. It should be the ignored war. It should be the mystery war.
I like Ignore War, actually. I think Ignore War, it's got a good cadence to it. It kind of rolls off the tongue, and I think that's what we should call it from now. Let's get let's talk to these Eve media people, whoever they are, and get them to publish some stories about the Ignore War.
Was it a real war though? Because it was always going to end one way.
Shine's just trying to give Dunk like a small coronary for.
I mean,
my blood pressure thing is in the other room. I'll go get that if you want.
I don't know. From
all right, that's my rant.
I just want to point out for the listeners that Dunk Dinkle, in addition to being a member of the Legacy Coalition and everything, because he sits on the Council of Stellar Management, he is under a non-disclosure agreement and can only talk about certain things. And he has been expertly navigating that all day, the whole show, which I will point out is a little bit easier because we're doing a retrospective on what happened this year. So anything that's happened publicly, he can talk about. It makes his job a little bit easier. But anything that hasn't happened in the future, he has to be careful because he can only talk about things that is publicly known and announced. But he's done a great job on this. But I'd like to ask him for a moment to say a few words about what happened this year on this Council of Stellar Management. What can you tell us? What can you actually say?
Using my calm voice, I would say that this has been, the word I have chosen to use is a tumultuous year for it being on the CSM, because as we, CSM 14, especially the new members, they came in as the Chaos era had already swung into effect. And so it was trying to catch up with not just understanding the way CCP worked internally, what the hell is going on with all this chaos changes, what's the plan, all that kind of stuff. And then at the same time, CCP very publicly is saying they want to reinvent themselves, not just in how the game is played, how the economy works, but how they make decisions as a company about what should go into the game. And so it was a very tumultuous time. I mentioned earlier in the show, a lot of focus on the core parts of EVE that aren't really the ship design parts, but are the why are people fighting? What are they fighting over? How do we bring new players into the game? How do we hold on to them for more than 90 days? A lot of that stuff, a lot of the back end, like how do we rebuild the back end of EVE so that we don't have as many problems as we've had in the past? So there's a lot of that going on at the same time, while CSM members are getting pinged about, like, why can't there be 5 more power grid on the Hyperion, or make the Nighthawk rule the skies again? Like, so it's a very difficult time to kind of keep a focus on what CCP needs to hear from the CSM.
And some of the new CSM, as you were bringing it up, there are some huge names, right? There's you, obviously, biggest name of all. There's Gobbin, the leader of Pandemic Horde. There's Villy, a major FC for the Legacy Coalition and Test Alliance, who's been around forever, like a storied name. Exuki, like one of the first wormhole candidates to get on there in a long time. And Olmeca, who made it on there as well. Olmeca, the original Gargoon. He's actually a super good guy to have a conversation with about Eve. It's super interesting to get his insight. like you guys are huge names into the CSM. How was it interacting with kind of the other established people in the CSM and learning the rope?
Well, I'm very lucky that I had kind of known most of the people in person before this because of going to so many Eve real life events and things like that. But there were a lot of people that had strong opinions about what was going to happen at CSM, the new members, the old members, and all that kind of stuff. And I was very happy at the first summit. Everyone kind of said, "Hey, we're all in this together. We all have common goal of wanting more people, more fun and Eve, more explosions, that kind of stuff." And I think the penultimate moment for me was seeing Aerith hugging Omeka as we're getting ready to leave at the end of the summit. Because going into it, they both had very different opinions of each other and their take on Eve before we got there, and then after we hung out for a week and kind of chatted with things. So I think that the group cohesed a little bit, being in person the way it hadn't been before we were in person. So I think it was a good thing. I think that the face-to-face meeting of CSM members is very powerful.
Yeah, and I can speak from, I was on the CSM 6 and 7, which had a lot of like Gur like enemies on each other at the same time. And the meetings, people were like super helpful, super nice to one another, super respectful. We all had the same goal, right, which was to improve the game without trying to get an advantage necessarily for like our groups. It has never been about doing that. So I'm glad to see nothing has changed on that front, and that it's still a friendly atmosphere where just passionate Eve players trying to kind of impart their knowledge and make a difference.
So going back to what happened with players as the as the year was coming to a close, after the legacy, after the unknown war, what were we calling it?
The Forgotten War.
The Forgotten War. After the Forgotten War, I forgot the name already, ended. You guys had like a short break, and then you declared war again. That was like a pretty short break, I thought. I thought if the Imperium were doing this, you guys would have had like 6 months off at least. But no.
Who did we declare war on?
Well, let's back up for a little bit. First, PanFam came into Tenal and attacked the Dead Coalition for what seemed to me like for something to do. Something to just to have some interesting war activity in their Eve gameplay mix. Is that a fair, Elise?
Yeah, I'd say so. I have no insight into the goings on and the decision making for any of this, but my view was they looked at tributes, like PanFam looked at tribute, and they're like, "Man, these guys seem to be having a lot of fun. I don't want to mess with that. Let's go mess with Sword because that's always fun." Like I think that's how it went that way. And I think they all deep down, I think they're all trying to secretly woo Trigger Happy to be like on their cause. And Kendar is like perfectly organizing this, where he's like not trying to take a side. He's just sitting where he is, managing it perfectly, and so his little group doesn't, or his big group now doesn't get caught up in any things he doesn't want it to be caught up in. But yeah, so the TLDR is, yeah, they just see Sword. They're like, easy picking. Let's go fight these guys. Let's just get some content for the winter. Shoot some people that we're acquainted with. We don't have to travel very far. I don't think there's any vitriol in it. It's just a matter of like, hey, they're close. Targets of opportunity.
So then, with no insider information, it looked to me like the Dead Coalition then hired the Initiative to come in and help bolster their side against NC Dot and the PanFam folks. Is that true? I'm just guessing. Dark, can you talk to it?
Yeah, so I'm not going to use the word hire because there was no monetary transactions or anything of the sort.
Oh.
Basically, what happened was Sword Dragon sent me a D-scan in EU Prime, I think, of 20 Titans hitting a Keepstar. And Initiative is an EU alliance. Our US is very small, our AU is even small, but our EU is quite big. and Darkness and Ranger Regiment and Deco, they don't really have an EU time zone presence. They have a small presence, but it's nothing big. Their main presence is AU and RU time zones. So again, from what I went back to said earlier, we've been sitting in Fountain for a long time. Drama levels were rising again. Everyone was super bored. And if somebody is using 20 Titans to reinforce hostile keep stars in our prime time, and specifically because it's NC Dot, who Initiative have a lot of bad blood with, we just said, you know what, let's take the opportunity. We spoke to Deadco. We asked if we could stage in their keep stars. They said yes, and we moved everything, all our supers and titans, back up to T, just to try and get some content out of NC. But no, hiring is not the word I'd use.
Okay.
But it's a good situation for Initiative, right? Because you get content fed directly to you. You don't really have to worry about defending anything because they're timing everything for Australian time zone, and the Ranger Regiment and Darkness people can save. So you just get timers that you can get to show up to and shoot people, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's not what happened at all. What actually happened was Deadco at the same time moved their super fleet and their main alliances into the same system we did. Actually the day before Initiative moved up, and kind of there had been this steady push from PamFam from Cobalt Edge into Tenal, which is this massive regional jump between Cobalt Edge and Tenal. So they got a foothold into Tenal, and they started pushing from the northeast down, basically through Tenal. And when we deployed we deployed a branch, not Tenal, apologies. All that stopped. The 20 Titans reffing keep stars in EU time zone, it all stopped, which was great. Unfortunately, what then happened was NC Dot very kindly exposed a weakness that we have that we didn't really consider at the time, which was going behind us and reinforcing every goddamn iHub that we have in Cloud Ring for jump bridges to the north, which was basically what it meant was we had parked our super fleet in the north. They couldn't make any progress, so they would come back down to the west, down to Fountain, and hit all of our stuff in Cloud Ring and Fountain. So it meant that realistically our supers were parked in the north, preventing them from doing anything, and their subcaps were taking wormholes down into the west and creating timers for us, preventing us from doing anything in the north. So it turned into a bit of a stalemate, unfortunately. We did get one or two good fights. I think we won one major iHub fight, and then we lost another fight. So there was a little bit of fighting, but it wasn't anything major, unfortunately.
All the best laid plans. And I see Pando saying in chat that Eve London, which was the last stop of the invasion tour, also kind of got in the way because a lot of people went to that event.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was just a combination of things. But then, this was all in the lead up to Christmas, and kind of when I'd been speaking to Pando and Sister Bliss about what we would be, we kind of had put like a couple of weeks to maybe anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks kind of timer on the deployment, which would have brought us up to Christmas. So kind of as soon as Christmas was about to hit, we made the decision to pull everything back because we didn't want to. Basically, we didn't want our supers and titans stuck in a. Yes, it was friendly, but they weren't our keep stars basically for Christmas. So if anything had gone wrong, it would have been just a massive headache trying to fix it all when we came back after Christmas. So we made the decision to pull our supers and titans back to Fountain, and then Test piped up out of nowhere and announced that they were declaring war through Reddit, which was interesting.
So there was apparently a CSM meeting at one point, and a disagreement. Don't say anything, Dunk. And a disagreement between a couple of members there, and they felt strongly enough about it that Vili declared war on Sword Dragon and sort of brought, Test Alliance Please Ignore along with him on his war. And I don't. Oh, that's funny. If you're not able to see the camera because you're listening to the podcast, Mr. Dunk Dinkle has just placed a piece of tape over his lips to prevent himself from saying anything that he shouldn't be saying right now. Anyway, it's very funny. But so then, Test, who just finished a war not very long ago, has now chosen to engage all the way across on the opposite side of the universe against Sword Dragon, which kind of puts him in some ways on the same side as NC Dot and PanFam by de facto, and therefore kind of puts him against the Initiative. And then because the Initiative are the brothers of the Imperium, and this throws the Imperium then as a whole into a whole question of, all right, what are we doing here in this complicated plate of spaghetti? And I don't even know. Maybe Vili brought the whole Legacy Coalition and not just Test Alliance with him on this thing. But Dunk probably can't say anything.
This
is test being test right now. This is test being test, and Brave and the rest of Legacy aren't officially at war. We're always happy to go join fights, and you might see people on kill mills and stuff like that. But I don't believe this is a Legacy sponsored event. But I have to go soon. That was Mrs. Dinkle telling me it's time to get off the phone.
Understood. Well, we need to wind down anyway. There was a surprise debut of the HyperNet relay system, which kind of brings back some of the feeling of Summer Blink, if you remember that old time fun little semi-gambling thing. And then there was a surprise holiday gift of teleporting filaments that would let you take up to, I think, max, depending on the filament, up to 25 with you on a little fleet, and it would teleport you to a random nullsec location to enjoy the view and or shoot the locals.
Yeah, it's sort of, to me, it seemed like an iteration on, and we talked to the community guys about it last week. It seemed like an iteration on kind of Blackout, where they get the same idea, which is like more chaos into nullsec systems, but without going full ham on removing all the information. So you can, Capsuleers have gotten a name for this, these filaments. They've nicknamed them yeet fleets. So you can yeet your fleet to an area of nullsec that you don't know, and you can just kill people there, and then you're done. It's a pretty quick way to, and by done, I mean you usually end up horribly dead at the end. But you get some kills in the process, so it's a lot of fun.
So yeah, Dark, can you say something about Pando's streams by any chance in his podcast that we're releasing on the network here at Talking Station?
Yeah, absolutely. So Pandorelka from Initiative, I think he's in chat and we've mentioned him a couple of times. He has his own Twitch channel and he does the podcasts as well with you guys. He does a lot of small gang fleets, especially with the filaments, and they're quite fun to watch, and it's always interesting what's going to happen. So his name on Twitch is Zepando, Zehpando, if anyone wants to check him out.
All right, thank you for your time. Thank you, Dunk Dinkle from Brave. Thank you, Darkshines from the Initiative. We're out of time. We will see you. Our next show is Sunday, January 5th, 2020. So join us next year for Talking in Stations. Thanks, and video